A child! The sharp cry tore through the frozen silence of the polar night, and the ice beneath her feet trembled. Elder Anya, blind since birth, felt the 70-dc wind whip her wrinkled face, but it was the dense, wild scent that petrified her. 7 massive white beasts, each weighing over 1,000 kilograms, stalked the despair. Her acute senses warned her of the impending tragedy, and she knew an innocent life depended on her next steps. Now, in the deepest darkness of Yakutia, what would a blind woman do, facing hungry giants, to save a lost soul? Anya didn't need eyes to perceive the spreading panic. The child's cry, though distant, echoed not only in the icy air, but also in the hearts of the villagers, which now beat with silent despair. She felt the tremor in the ground, not just from the bear's heavy footsteps, but from the earth itself, which seemed to mourn the impending loss. The scent of human fear mingled with the metallic, wild odor of the predators, creating a nauseating symphony that only she seemed to discern with such clarity. Darkness was her ally, not her enemy, and within it, her other senses blossomed with an almost supernatural intensity. Her wrinkled hand tightened around the staff, polished smooth by time, a gift from her father, a legendary hunter who had taught her to see with her soul. Her thin lips moved in a silent prayer to the spirits of the tundra, asking for strength and guidance. The wind howled, mocking her fragility, but Anya, despite her many winters, felt an ancient protective fury ignite within her chest. It wasn't anger at the bears, but a fierce determination not to let the darkness claim another innocent life. She took a deep breath, the icy air burning her lungs, but invigorating her spirit. In the communal tent, the villagers' faces were pale, illuminated only by the faint light of the campfire. Elder Boris, his voice hoarse, tried to calm the child's mother, who was sobbing uncontrollably. "It's useless, Anya," he said, his voice heavy with resignation. "The bears are too many, and the night is deep. No one can face them, not even you." His eyes, though full of respect for the elder, reflected defeat. The community, paralyzed by fear and the brutal logic of their environment, had already accepted the inevitable, the cruel truth of life in Yakutia. But Anya didn't hear the resignation. She heard the child's accelerated heartbeat, which somehow reached her through the vibrations in the air and the ground, a faint melody of life. She felt the faint warmth of life, fragile yet still present. Her connection to the tundra, which many saw as a curse due to her blindness, was her greatest blessing. She could feel every crack in the ice, every snowdrift, every change in air pressure that indicated the approach of a creature or the presence of a small human. With a resolute nod, Anya turned towards the tent's entrance. "It's not useless as long as there's a breath," she declared, her voice surprisingly firm, cutting through the atmosphere of despair like a sharp knife. There was no arrogance in her words, only the unwavering truth of her conviction. She picked up a small leather pouch containing dried herbs and small objects she had kept for decades, secrets passed down from generation to generation, ancestral tools for survival. It was her toolkit for the unseen, for what the tundra demanded. The villagers watched in stunned silence as she prepared. With each movement, despite the slowness imposed by age, there was a precision that bordered on ritual. She tied extra furs to her feet, feeling the texture of the compacted snow beneath her soles, preparing for the journey. The cold was an old acquaintance, a constant adversary, but today it was merely a backdrop for the true battle. With each step she took towards the exit, the air seemed to vibrate with the urgency of her mission. She knew the journey would be solitary. No one would dare accompany her, and she wouldn't ask. The responsibility was hers, a burden she carried with dignity and a deep love for her people. The image of the lost child, fragile and defenseless, was the beacon that guided her through the darkness. Her fingers touched the wood of her staff, seeking the strength it represented. She was blind, yes, but her inner vision, sharpened by a life of challenges, was clearer than anyone else's there. The village might have given up, but Anya would not. She was the hope that refused to die, a flickering flame in the polar night. Anya took the first step out of the tent, and the icy embrace of the polar night enveloped her like a heavy cloak. The air, so dense it felt cutting, burned her nostrils, but she inhaled deeply, feeling the icy energy fill her lungs. The wind howled, an ancient melody the tundra sang, and Anya heard every note, every whisper that carried information about the terrain and the direction of the elements. Her feet, protected by several layers of fur, sank slightly into the soft snow before finding the firmness of compacted ice. She felt the texture beneath her soles, a familiar language her eyes could never see, but which her hands and feet knew intimately. The staff, extended before her, probed the path, an extension of her own perception. It wasn't just a support, but a sensor, transmitting every irregularity, every change in the terrain's incline. She could see the landscape through the wooden tip, feeling the small elevations, the treacherous depressions, and the smooth ice patches that could fell a man with perfect vision. The darkness was absolute, but for Anya, it was just another layer of the world to be deciphered. Her focus was on sound, or the absence of it. The child's cry had vanished, swallowed by the vast silence of the night. But Anya still felt the faint vibration, a persistent echo of life, a distant heartbeat that pulled her forward. It was like an invisible thread connecting her to the lost soul, a promise of hope that refused to break. She also felt the absence of footsteps behind her. The villagers had remained in the tent, paralyzed by fear, but perhaps, just perhaps, their silent prayers accompanied her. As she advanced, the scent of the bears, previously distant and diffuse, began to intensify. It wasn't an aggressive scent yet, but a heavy, wild trail that the wind carried in gusts. 7 beasts, she remembered, each a mountain of flesh and fury. Anya pressed her lips together, a deep wrinkle marking her furrowed brow. She knew she needed to act with cunning, not brute force. Her methods would be those of the tundra, subtle and deceptive. She began to deviate from her most direct route, moving in a zigzag, seeking the strategic points she had known since childhood. On a small rise she stopped, her wrinkled fingers probing the frozen ground. Carefully, she took a small handful of pungent dried herbs from her leather pouch and scattered them to the wind. They weren't traps of flesh, but traps of the senses, designed to confuse, to divert. Ancestral wisdom whispered that predators, however powerful, were creatures of habit and roots, and an unexpected scent, a subtle disturbance, could sow doubt in their minds. Anya moved to the next point, her steps slow but steady. She felt the urgency of time, the relentless cold that stole the child's strength with every passing minute. A solitary tear, frozen before it could even fall, marked the corner of her blind eye. It wasn't from fear, but from deep compassion, and the pain of knowing that life was so fragile in this hostile world. She was that child's only hope, and the tundra, her old friend and enemy, would be the stage for her journey. She needed to find the child before the bears, guided by their predatory instinct, found her. With each step, her connection to the child seemed to strengthen, guiding her through the darkness and imminent danger. Anya pressed on, each step a silent prayer to the tundra. Her staff guided her through snowdrifts and ice-covered rock formations, each touch a detailed reading of the terrain. She felt the vibration in the air, a cold current moving from the east, bringing with it not only the acrid scent of ice and snow, but also, now stronger, the heavy, musky breath of the bears. They were close, very close. The sound of their footsteps, previously muffled by distance and wind, began to manifest as a dull thud on the ground, a rhythmic and menacing beat that Anya felt through the soles of her feet. Her lips tightened. She knew she needed to quicken her pace, but caution was her best ally. A false step could mean a fatal fall or worse, alert the beasts to her presence. Her wrinkled fingers fumbled in her leather pouch again. This time, she pulled out a small metal bell, old and rusty, that her grandfather used to ward off evil spirits. It wasn't to scare away bears, but to create a distraction, a strange and unexpected sound that could break the predator's focus. With a precise movement, she hung it on a dry branch of a twisted bush, almost invisible in the darkness, and swung it lightly. The metallic sound, sharp and dissonant, cut through the silence for an instant before being swallowed by the wind. Anya continued, her heart beating with a mix of fear and unwavering courage. She felt the child, now more clearly, as a fragile point of warmth amidst the biting cold. The vibration was stronger, more urgent, almost like a call. Was the child injured, freezing? Anxiety tightened her chest, but she transformed it into fuel for her tired muscles. Her senses were at their peak, every nerve in her body attuned to the environment. She heard the rustle of snow beneath her own steps, the distant crackle of ice, and the subtle sound of the wind that seemed to carry the bear's intentions. Suddenly, the ground trembled violently. It wasn't the wind nor the ice. It was the colossal weight of the beasts. They were moving and fast. Anya stopped, motionless, her hands gripping her staff tightly. She waited, breathing shallowly, trying to discern the direction. The scent of the bears became overwhelming, and she could almost feel the warmth of their massive bodies, even at a considerable distance. Their powerful noses were sniffing, searching. The bell she had hung chimed again, a faint sound, but one that seemed to reverberate in the vastness. Anya smiled faintly, a tense, determined smile. The distraction was working. The bears, accustomed to the monotony of the tundra, were likely confused by the strange sound. She would use this confusion to her advantage. Turning slightly, she began to move in a new direction, not straight towards the child, but in an arc seeking higher, rockier ground. There, she could have an advantage, a tactile vantage point from which she could feel the bear's movements more clearly and perhaps prepare a more effective trap. Her fingers touched the cold rock, feeling the irregularities and crevices. She knew the bears were powerful, but they were also creatures of instinct. Her blindness, which the village saw as a weakness, was in fact a gateway to deeper perception, an attunement to the world that others had forgotten. She felt the pulse of the earth, the breath of the wind, the life and death that intertwined in Yakutia. The child was a delicate thread in this tapestry, and Anya would not allow it to break. She began to stack small stones, creating a subtle barrier, a disturbance in the path the bears might follow. It wasn't a physical barrier, but a psychological one, a way to divert their usual routes, to force them to think, to hesitate. Each stone placed was an act of faith, a belief in the ancestral wisdom that guided her. The cold bit at her hands, but she didn't feel it. Her mind was focused, her heart a drum of hope. The cry now was unmistakable, faint, frightened, but present. The child was near, and so were the bears. Anya felt a shiver run down her spine, not from fear, but from an overwhelming urgency. She stood on the threshold, between darkness and light, between life and death. Her blind eyes fixed on the direction of the sound, a vision only she could possess. The battle was about to begin, not with weapons, but with the cunning of an elder and the protective fury of a mother. Anya felt the air vibrate with the urgency of the moment, every cell in her body on high alert. The child's cry, now closer, was a tenuous thread of life pulling her with irresistible force through the darkness. Her blind eyes, though they didn't see the icy landscape, perceived the imminent danger with a clarity that transcended sight. The bears were there, their massive, hungry presences manifesting through the tremor in the ground and the dense scent that permeated the air. It was a deadly dance, and Anya, despite her age and fragility, was determined to lead. She moved with surprising agility for her many winters, each step calculated, each touch of her staff a precise reading of the terrain. The stones she had stacked were a small barrier, yes, but their greater purpose was to divert the beast's attention, forcing them onto a less direct route, gaining precious seconds. She could feel the bear's frustration, a raw energy of confusion and anger emanating from them as their powerful noses tried to decipher the strange scents and subtle interruptions in their path. The bell she had hung emitted a faint chime, a ghostly sound that seemed to echo in the vastness, disturbing the natural order the predators expected. Anya approached a crevice in the ice, an invisible danger to others, but an ally to her. Carefully she knelt, her wrinkled fingers probing the sharp edge. From her leather pouch, she took out a small vial containing an oily, strong-smelling liquid, a mixture of seal blubber and macerated herbs, a natural repellent that Yakutian hunters used to protect their tents. With a swift movement, she poured the liquid into the crevice, letting the icy wind spread the pungent odor. It wasn't a trap to harm, but to confuse, to create an invisible barrier of aversion that the bears would avoid. Anya's heart beat strongly, a steady rhythm of determination. She felt the cold in her bones, exhaustion beginning to weigh on her muscles, but the image of the child, fragile and defenseless, was a fire that kept her warm. She was so close. The child's crying was now a muffled lament, a sound that tore at Anya's soul, but also propelled her forward. She needed to reach her, to protect her. Suddenly, a deep, grave growl echoed, making the air tremble. One of the bears was very close, its scent overwhelming, its breathing heavy. Anya froze, her body tense, every fiber of her being attuned to the beast. She felt the movement of the air, the displacement caused by the beast's massive body. It was sniffing the air, confused by the sense, but dangerously close. She could almost feel the warmth of its icy breath. Her fingers tightened around her staff, not as a weapon, but as an anchor for her own courage. She waited motionless, her mind a whirlwind of strategies and prayers. The bear moved, its heavy steps sinking into the snow, circling, trying to identify the source of the disturbance. Anya realized it was being diverted by the crevice and the scent, exactly as she had hoped. But time was running out. She felt the child, now just a few meters away, a small point of warmth and fear. With a renewed breath, Anya moved again, not towards the bear, but in a swift, silent arc, using the crevice as cover. Her feet found a small depression, and she crouched, almost merging with the landscape. She could feel the child's presence, a small form huddled under a snowdrift, the crying now a faint whisper. The distance was minimal, but the bears were everywhere. She needed a plan, one last trick of ancestral wisdom to create an opening. Anya fumbled on the ground, her fingers finding dry branches and sharp stones. She began to scratch the ice, creating a subtle but constant sound that mimicked the rustling of small animals. It was a sonic lure, intended to draw the bear's attention away from the child, towards her. The cold bit at her hands, but she didn't stop. The child's life depended on it. The bear's growl intensified, and she knew her lure was working. It was approaching the sound, moving away from the child. Anya pressed her lips together, the protective fury in her chest burning stronger than the cold of Yakutia. She was ready for the confrontation. Anya felt the air vibrate with the bear's proximity. The deep growl resonated in her chest. The beast's scent, wild and damp, was overwhelming. Her wrinkled fingers tightened around her staff, a familiar comfort. She couldn't see the mountain of white fur, but she felt every movement, every heavy step in the snow. The bear was just a few meters away, drawn by the sound she had created, moving away from the child. It was a calculated risk. Anya's heart beat like a drum. She raised her staff to feel the direction of the charge. The bear, irritated, lunged with a furious grunt. Anya felt the ground tremble. The wind, displaced by the colossal mass, whipped her face. With agility, she spun, using her staff for support and to deflect. The bear brushed past, its furry flank grazing Anya's arm. A sharp pain pierced her shoulder, but she barely felt it. The beast, disoriented, stopped, sniffing the air. Its growl turned into a frustrated howl. Anya seized the moment. She knew she couldn't fight brute force, but she could use cunning. She fumbled in her leather pouch, pulled out a handful of dried pepper powder and pungent herbs. With a strong breath, she cast the powder into the air, aiming it where she sensed the bear's head. The effect was immediate. The bear let out a roar of pain and surprise, shaking its head. The irritating powder hit its eyes and nostrils, temporarily blinding it and causing a guttural cough. It began to thrash, clawing at the air with giant paws, disoriented and furious. Anya retreated, sensing the danger of its claws. The bear's scent of rage and confusion was palpable. She turned, her senses focused on the child. The faint crying had ceased, replaced by a terrifying silence. Anya crawled through the snow, her fingers fumbling desperately. Finally, she felt the small, huddled form, icy to the touch, but still breathing. It was a girl, small and fragile, trembling. Anya enveloped her in her arms, feeling the tiny, cold body. The elder's heart tightened. The bear still thrashed, but it was moving away, the pungent powder driving it further. Anya knew she had gained precious minutes, but the other 6 bears were still out there, and time was running out. She needed to get the child to safety, to the village. With the girl in her arms, Anya stood up. The pain in her shoulder was constant, but her determination unwavering. She was that child's hope, and she would not fail. She began to move, her staff now serving as support for both her and her small burden. With each step, she felt the weight of responsibility, but also a renewed strength, a deep and ancestral love. The tundra was still a relentless enemy, but Anya, with the child nestled against her chest, was ready to face whatever came. The tundra was still a relentless enemy, but Anya, with the child nestled against her chest, was ready to face whatever came. The girl, a precious and icy burden, felt like a small wounded bird in her arms, but her faint breath was a hymn to life. The pain in Anya's shoulder throbbed, a constant reminder of the confrontation, but it was a sacrifice she accepted with the dignity of one who protects what is most valuable. With her staff serving as a third leg, she began to move, each step slow and deliberate, testing the ground beneath the snow. The scent of the bear she had repelled still lingered in the air, mingling with the more distant odor of the other 6. They hadn't left. They were merely confused, perhaps irritated, but still an imminent threat. Anya felt their presence as a pressure in the air, an invisible shadow that followed her. Her ears, sharpened by blindness, picked up the faintest sounds. The rustle of snow in the distance, the crack of ice under something heavy, the distant howl of the wind that seemed to carry messages from the tundra itself. She adjusted the girl in her arms, trying to transmit some of the warmth from her own aged body. The child let out a small whimper, a sound that pierced Anya's heart, but also propelled her forward. She needed to be quick, but prudence was vital. The path back to the village was long and treacherous, and every minute under the polar darkness was a risk to the fragile life she carried. Anya began to deviate from the most obvious routes, seeking the depressions and small valleys she had known since childhood, where snowdrifts offered some cover and the ice was more stable. Her wrinkled fingers, even through her fur gloves, felt the texture of the terrain, reading the landscape as if it were an open book. She could discern the difference between soft snow and treacherous ice, between a firm rock and a thin layer that concealed an abyss. Suddenly, the ground beneath her feet emitted a deep, prolonged groan. It wasn't the tremor of the bears, but an organic, guttural sound that came from the depths of the frozen earth itself. Anya stopped, motionless, her heart tightening in her chest. Her senses screamed in alarm. She felt a different vibration, more intense and pervasive, spreading through the ice like a wave. It was a cracking sound, a lament of the tundra that she knew well, but had never felt with such force. The girl in her arms, who until then had been almost inert, trembled violently and let out a sharp cry, different from her previous whimpers. It wasn't just from cold or fear of the bears, but from an instinctive perception of imminent danger. The child's small body, nestled against hers, seemed to amplify the vibration, as if the girl, in her fragility, was more attuned to the earth's pulse than any adult. Anya realized that the child's crying was not just a sign of despair, but a warning, an echo of the tundra itself. The ice was cracking, a massive crevice was opening, and the sound, previously a groan, transformed into a loud, terrifying crack that echoed in the polar night. Anya felt the ground give way slightly beneath her feet, a terrible sensation of instability. The danger of the bears, for an instant, was overshadowed by this new and overwhelming threat from the earth itself. She was trapped between the beast's fury and the tundra's unpredictability. It was an unexpected turning point, a final test of her resilience. She needed to act, and fast, or both would be swallowed by the icy abyss. Anya felt the ground give way once more, a dry, terrifying crack echoing beneath her feet. The girl's sharp cry in her arms mirrored her own terror, but Anya couldn't afford to succumb to panic. Her wrinkled fingers tightened around her staff with renewed strength, seeking stability. The vibration of the cracking ice was like an irregular, violent pulse that surged up her legs, through her body, to the deepest part of her soul. She could see the crevices opening, not with her eyes, but with every nerve, every fiber of her being. The air grew denser, laden with the damp, metallic scent of breaking ice, a grim premonition of the abyss forming. "Shh, my little one," she whispered, her voice hoarse but firm against the child's icy hair. "Anya is here. We will be safe." The words were as much for the girl as for herself, a promise she refused to break. She felt the girl shrink further into her arms, her small body trembling uncontrollably. The elder knew the child's fear was real, and that the girl, in her innocence, perhaps sensed the proximity of death with even greater clarity, amplifying the danger with her own fragility. She needed a way out, and fast. Her staff, more than a mere walking stick, was an extension of her senses. With it, Anya began to probe the ice ahead, not just seeking firmness, but reading the nuances of sound and vibration. Thinner ice emitted a hollow, dangerous sound. More stable ice, a denser, muffled one. It was a language she had learned over a lifetime in the tundra, wisdom passed down through generations. Now her only compass, the bears. They hadn't disappeared. Anya felt the distant tremor of their heavy footsteps, now mingled with the crackle of the ice. Did they also sense the danger? Or would they be drawn by the confusion, by the vulnerability the cracking ice created? She imagined the beasts, their mountains of white fur, perhaps hesitating, perhaps growling in frustration at the unstable terrain. Their scent still lingered, a constant reminder of the threat surrounding her, another layer of terror upon the yielding ice. Anya moved with agonizing slowness, each step a test, each movement a silent prayer. Her blind eyes were fixed on an inner vision, a mental map of the tundra she had built over the years. She remembered a small, rocky elevation, an outcrop of solid ground that stretched like a backbone beneath the ice in a nearby area. If she could reach that point, perhaps there would be a chance to escape the abyss. Her injured shoulder throbbed, a dull ache that intensified with each muscle contraction, but Anya ignored it. The child's life was more important. She felt the girl's small hands tighten on her parka, a gesture of complete trust that filled her with an unspeakable strength. It was for this trust that she continued, for this small flame of life that she protected with her very existence, whatever the cost. Suddenly, a new sound. Not a crack, but a deep, prolonged howl coming from one of the crevices. It was the sound of the ice separating, of a colossal mass breaking free. Anya felt a tug, a sensation that the ground beneath her feet was moving, drifting away. She staggered, almost losing her balance. The girl's heart pounded against her chest, and a silent scream escaped her lips, mingling with the tundra's lament. Anya threw herself to the side, using her staff to propel herself, desperately seeking what seemed to be a more solid piece of ice. She fell to her knees, the impact sending a wave of pain through her body, but she kept the girl firmly nestled. The sound of the ice breaking continued, a roar of nature that seemed to swallow everything. She could feel the abyss opening, the damp cold rising from the depths, threatening to engulf them. She was on an ice floe, floating, or perhaps just moving slowly. The bears. Their danger seemed to have diminished for a moment, overshadowed by the tundra's fury, but Anya knew it was a temporary truce, a deceptive pause. She needed to find direction, stability. With her knees still in the snow, she probed the ice around her, seeking a connection, a bridge to safety. The girl cried softly, her face hidden in Anya's neck, a sound that broke the elder's heart. Anya took a deep breath, the icy air burning her lungs. She would not surrender, not now. Her faith in ancestral wisdom, her connection to the tundra, and her love for the child would guide her. She stood up, her staff once again firmly planted, her lips pressed into a thin line of pure determination. The journey was far from over. The ice floe was a fragile raft in a sea of frozen chaos. Anya, still on her knees, felt the subtle and terrifying displacement beneath her. The groan of the ice as it broke echoed in the vast immensity, a sound that pierced her very soul. The little girl, nestled against her, was a tiny burden of fear, her sobs now a muffled lament against Anya's parka. "We're all right, little one," Anya murmured, her voice a thread of hope in the darkness. She squeezed the child closer, feeling the faint warmth of the tiny body, an anchor amidst the instability. With her staff, Anya probed around, assessing the extent of her new prison. The ice beneath her knees was uneven, with small elevations and depressions, but seemed solid enough to bear their weight. The real danger was separation, the drift. She could feel the invisible current of water beneath the ice, pulling the ice floe away from the frozen mainland. The damp cold rising from the crevices was more intense now, a constant reminder of the abyss's depth below. Anya rose with difficulty, her injured shoulder protesting with every movement, but the pain was secondary to the urgency of the moment. She needed to know where she was going, or where the tundra was taking them. She closed her eyes, focusing on the vibrations, the whipping sound of the wind, and the scent of the air. The wind, once an enemy, was now a guide. She felt its direction, the way it sculpted the snowdrifts and how it carried the salty scent of the distant sea, an indication that they were drifting away from solid ground, the bears. Their threat hadn't vanished, merely transformed. Anya felt their presence, no longer as a direct tremor in the ground, but as a tension in the air, an abnormal silence that stretched beyond the wind's howl. They were watching, no doubt perhaps confused by the sudden change in terrain, but still there, patient predators awaiting an opportunity. She imagined their eyes gleaming in the darkness, their nostrils sniffing the air, wild instinct dictating every movement. The girl, still trembling, lifted her head. Her large, frightened eyes met Anya's blind face. In a gesture of childlike trust, she extended a tiny, icy hand and touched the elder's wrinkled cheek. It was a light touch, but it ignited Anya's heart, rekindling the flame of her determination. "Don't be afraid, little one. Anya knows the way." She began to walk in circles on the small ice floe, her staff tapping gently, testing the solidity and direction of movement. She felt the subtle tilt, the way the ice slowly rotated, propelled by the currents. There was hope, a small chance. If the current carried them near another stable ice mass or to a shallower part of the frozen river, she might find a passage. Ancestral wisdom whispered in her mind, stories of hunters lost on the ice, of how they read the stars hidden behind the clouds, of how they felt the change in currents and the wind's direction. Anya didn't see the stars, but she felt the invisible dance of the world around her. She remembered a legend about the ice spirits who sometimes guided the lost, and felt a deep connection to the tundra itself, as if the frozen earth was speaking to her. Suddenly, a different sound. Not the crack of ice, nor the howl of the wind, but a muffled rhythmic sound like a distant heartbeat. Anya stopped, her body tense. The girl clutched in her arms. She tilted her head, concentrating. It was a sound coming from the depths, an echo propagating through the ice. It wasn't a bear. It was something more, something that filled her with a strange mix of apprehension and hope. She felt the vibration intensify, a steady rhythm that seemed to draw closer. Could it be the village? Or perhaps a group of hunters? The possibility rekindled a spark in her chest. The tundra, which had proven so relentless, might be offering a chance. Anya turned in the direction of the sound, her wrinkled face marked by hope. She needed to reach the source of that sound, needed to find salvation for the small life in her arms. The journey was far from over, but a new path, uncertain and dangerous, had just revealed itself. Anya clutched the girl in her arms, her heart pounding, not just from effort and pain, but from the spark of hope that unknown sound ignited. The muffled rhythm, like a distant drum, seemed to come from the depths of the frozen earth, propagating through the unstable ice flow. She tilted her head, her acute ears trying to decipher the message the tundra was sending her. It wasn't the growl of bears, nor the lament of breaking ice. It was something more constant, more intentional. The girl, sensing the change in Anya's tension, lifted her head again, her large, moist eyes fixed on the elder's face. A small sob escaped her lips, but she didn't cry. She seemed to be listening too, her small hand still clutching Anya's parka. It was as if the child, in her vulnerability, could feel the promise contained in that sound, the possibility of an end to the terror. Anya closed her eyes, concentrating. The sound wasn't uniform. There was an interruption, an echo, as if it were a double beat, followed by a brief silence and then another beat. She recognized that pattern. It was the sound of an engine, a snowmobile engine, distant but unmistakable. A wave of relief and dread washed over her. Relief because it meant the village was looking for them. Dread because the ice flow continued to move and the snowmobile might be on solid ground or on ice they couldn't reach. "They're coming, little one," Anya whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "They're coming for us." The girl didn't understand the words, but she felt the urgency and hope in the elder's voice, and a small, trembling smile appeared on her icy lips. It was a glimpse of innocence that Anya refused to let vanish. With her staff, Anya began to probe the edge of the ice flow, seeking a direction. She could feel the current, the way the flow slowly rotated, but the sound of the engine seemed to come from a direction not aligned with the ice's natural movement. She needed to change their course, or at least influence their direction. She remembered ancient stories of how hunters used winds and currents to guide their ice boats on frozen rivers. Her injured shoulder throbbed with greater intensity, but Anya ignored the pain. The child's life depended on her clarity. She began to push her staff against the edges of the ice flow, seeking friction, trying to use the strength of her aged arms to alter their course. It was a monumental effort, and the flow was heavy, but every small deviation was a victory. The bears, they were still there. Anya felt the tension in the air, The abnormal silence that stretched beyond the wind's howl. They had adapted to the changing terrain, and now, perhaps, were observing the ice flow, waiting. She could almost feel their hungry eyes upon them, their nostrils sniffing the air, the promise of easy prey. The threat hadn't diminished, merely transformed. The sound of the snowmobile engine grew a little clearer, more distinct. Anya felt a new surge of energy. She continued to push her staff, her muscles burning, her breath ragged. The girl, sensing the elder's effort, clung even tighter, as if wanting to help. It was a silent connection, a sharing of burdens and hopes. Suddenly, the engine sound changed. It was no longer approaching, but seemed to be moving away. Anya froze, her heart plummeting. The snowmobile was changing direction, perhaps unaware they were there, lost on the broken ice. Terror seized her, a cold, paralyzing fear that was more intense than any Yakutian temperature. The hope that had ignited was fading, and the darkness seemed deeper than ever. She was so close, yet so far. Anya felt her heart freeze in her chest, a cold more penetrating than the Yakutian air. Hope, a tenuous thread that kept her standing, dissolved like snow in the sun. The sound of the snowmobile engine, which promised salvation, now receded, taking with it the chance of being found. She was so close, yet so far. A whimper of despair escaped her lips, so low that not even the wind carried it away. The girl in her arms, sensing the elder's sudden tension, began to cry again, a faint lament that echoed the emptiness Anya felt. The child's small hands tightened on Anya's parka, as if the girl was trying to hold on to the last spark of hope. Anya squeezed her eyes shut, her shoulder throbbing, but it was the pain in her soul that consumed her. She couldn't give up. Not now, not with the small life trembling in her arms. That cry, so fragile and desperate, was a call, an order for her to rise again. The promise she had made to the village, to herself, to the tundra itself, could not be broken. She was that child's guardian, and guardians do not give up. With a sigh that seemed to tear the air from her lungs, Anya opened her blind eyes, seeking an inner vision, a map of courage. The engine sound was more distant, but still present, a whisper on the wind. Why would they turn away? Did they not know she was there? Or were they searching in another direction, in a pattern she couldn't decipher? She needed to call out to them somehow, to let them know they were there, adrift. With her staff, Anya began to tap the ice with a steady rhythm, a muffled sound that propagated across the surface. It wasn't loud enough to alert the bears immediately, but perhaps, just perhaps, it could be felt as an unusual vibration through the more stable ice, or picked up by some keen sense of an experienced hunter. She tapped, paused, listened, tapped again. The effort made her injured shoulder protest with a sharp pain, but she ignored it, focused on the cadence, on the hope that this sound could be a bridge to salvation. The bears, they hadn't forgotten. Anya felt a new tension in the air, a heavy silence that wasn't the wind's, but that of observation. Their scent, previously more diffuse, now seemed closer, more intense. They were moving, adapting to the broken terrain, perhaps drawn by the rhythmic tapping of the staff. She could imagine them, their mountains of muscle and white fur lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. The ice floe, her fragile raft, was an easy target. Suddenly, the snowmobile engine's vibration changed again. It was no longer receding, but seemed to be oscillating, as if the vehicle was stopping or changing direction. Anya froze, her staff suspended in the air, her ears strained, trying to catch every nuance. The sound grew stronger for an instant, then weaker, and then a new sound mingled with it, a shout. Not a child's cry, but a human shout, distant yet unmistakable, laden with urgency. It was one of the village hunters. They had sensed her. They were close. But what did that shout mean? Was it a warning? A call for help? The tundra still held its secrets, and Anya knew the journey was far from over. Anya felt the hunter's shout reverberate through the ice, not as a sign of immediate salvation, but as an echo of alarm. It wasn't a welcoming call, but an urgent warning, laden with a tension she immediately recognized. Her acute ears caught the nuance. The shout wasn't just to locate them, but to warn. They had seen her, yes, but they had also seen what surrounded her. The bears. The elder clutched the girl in her arms, her heart beating like a wild drum against her ribs. The child, sensing the change in Anya's breathing, let out a faint whimper, her eyes wide with terror, though she couldn't see what Anya felt. The sound of the snowmobile engine, previously oscillating, now seemed closer, but still too distant for a safe crossing over the broken ice. The hunter's shout was a bridge of sound, but not of physical safety. Suddenly, the tension in the air transformed into movement. Anya felt the ground tremble, no longer from cracking ice, but from heavy, determined footsteps. The bears. The human shout had agitated them, transforming their patient observation into an imminent threat. She could feel their scent, now dense and aggressive, mingled with the metallic smell of the ice. They were 7 monsters, each a mountain of white fur, and they were approaching. Anya turned, her staff firmly planted, her mind working with terrifying clarity. The ice floe was small, a fragile stage for the impending confrontation. She couldn't run, she couldn't hide. Her only chance was to use the tundra itself. The ancestral traps that weren't of rope or wood, but of wisdom and knowledge of the environment. A deep growl echoed, coming from very close. Anya felt the vibration in the air, the beast's proximity. She raised her staff, not to attack, but to test the ice ahead, seeking the deepest crevices, the most unstable edges. The aurora borealis, as if responding to the drama, began to dance in the sky, painting the scene with green and purple hues, a spectacle of wild beauty that contrasted with the terror of the situation. "Stay still, my little one," Anya whispered, her voice a thread of steel. She felt the girl shrink, her face hidden in Anya's neck. The first bear emerged from the gloom, a colossal mass of muscle and fury. Its eyes gleamed with an ancestral hunger, fixed on the small figure of the elder and the child. Anya didn't hesitate. With a strength that sprang from her soul, she struck the ice with her staff, not once, but repeatedly, in a deafening rhythm. The hollow, piercing sound broke the silence, echoing in the vast immensity. The bear, startled by the unexpected noise and the vibration rising from the ice, recoiled a step, a growl of confusion escaping its throat. But the other bears were coming. Anya felt their presence, their heavy breaths, the tremor of the ice beneath their feet. She needed more. With her staff, she began to push one of the edges of the ice floe, right where a deep crevice opened. It was a monumental effort, her aged muscles burning, her injured shoulder protesting with a searing pain. But she continued, using every ounce of her strength to try and destabilize the floe, to create an obstacle between her and the beasts. A second bear lunged, its enormous paw raised. Anya, with unexpected ferocity, spun her staff, not to harm, but to deflect the blow, using the tip to strike the ice right in front of the bear's paw, making it slip momentarily. The maneuver, instinctive and desperate, saved her from a direct impact, but the sudden movement caused her to lose her balance. She fell sideways, shielding the girl with her own body. A cry of pain escaped her lips as her injured shoulder hit the ice hard. A sharp, searing pain exploded in her arm, but she didn't release the child. The girl cried, her terror palpable, but Anya couldn't give in. The bear, frustrated, growled again, its claws scraping the ice dangerously close. Anya, still on the ground, felt the bear's scent, its warm, heavy breath on her face. She raised her staff again, not as a weapon, but as a barrier, a symbol of her refusal to yield. Her blind eyes, fixed on an inner vision of courage, gleamed with unwavering determination. She was that child's guardian, and she would not allow the tundra's darkness to swallow them. The sound of the snowmobile engine, now louder, mingled with new shouts and the gleam of lights dancing in the darkness. The hunters were approaching, their voices laden with urgency, perhaps trying to scare off the bears. The aurora borealis exploded in a whirlwind of colors, illuminating the brutal scene. Anya, wounded and exhausted, felt a new surge of strength. She had resisted, she had defended. The journey was far from over, but the climax of her struggle against the beasts had been fought, and she, against all odds, was still standing. Anya felt the impact of the ice, the searing pain in her injured shoulder that reverberated through her entire body. But it wasn't the physical pain that propelled her, but the small life trembling in her arms, the tiny heart beating erratically against hers. The bear's growls, now closer, mingled with the hunter's urgent shouts, creating a chaotic symphony of terror and hope. The aurora borealis danced frantically above, as if the tundra itself were in dramatic ecstasy. Suddenly, a flash of strong lights swept through the darkness, coming from the direction of the hunters. They weren't just the snowmobile's headlights, but lit torches raised by steady hands. The hunters, knowledgeable in animal psychology, knew that sudden light and noise could disorient and frighten the beasts. And so it was. The bears, poised to make their final lunge, hesitated. The first, closest to Anya, recoiled with a frustrated snort, its eyes reflecting the torchlight with a mix of rage and confusion. Anya felt the beast's retreat, the diminishing pressure in the air. The other bears, though still visible as colossal shapes in the gloom, also moved away, their silhouettes blending into the icy landscape. They weren't fleeing, but regrouping, assessing the new threat. It was a truce, a precious moment. "Anya, we're here." Boris's voice, the hunter's leader, cut through the icy air, laden with relief and urgency. Anya felt a lump in her throat, warm tears streaming down her wrinkled face, mingling with the cold of Yakutia. She couldn't see, but she knew it was them, her family, her village. With superhuman effort, she stood up, her staff still firm in her hand, the girl clutched against her chest. The ice floe continued to float, but seemed to have stabilized slightly with the approach of the snowmobiles. The hunters, experienced in ice rescues, were already acting. Two of them, with ropes and grappling hooks, approached cautiously, testing the cracked ice between Anya's floe and the more stable bank. "Anya, extend your staff!" Boris shouted again. Anya obeyed, extending her trembling arm. One of the ropes was thrown with precision, and the grappling hook caught on her staff. Slowly, with the help of the hunters, the ice floe was pulled, narrowing the distance between them and safety. The girl, sensing the proximity of other humans, let out a cry of relief and extended her tiny arms towards the hunters. Boris was the first to reach them, his eyes moist with emotion at seeing the wounded elder and the child safe and sound. He carefully took the girl, nestling her in his strong arms. The child's crying, previously of terror, was now of pure exhaustion and relief. Other hunters helped Anya cross the last stretch of unstable ice. Her muscles were exhausted, her body trembled, but a deep peace settled in her soul. She had fulfilled her promise. The girl was safe. Back on solid ground, wrapped in warm furs, Anya felt the gentle fingers of a village woman examining her shoulder. The pain was intense, but the joy of having the child safe was greater. She could hear the whispers of admiration and relief, the voices of her people, the sound of the community reunited. The girl, now warmed and fed, was handed over to her parents, who embraced her with tears and gratitude. The reunion was a spectacle of love and relief, a testament to the strength of family bonds. Anya, though blind, felt the gazes of respect and reverence upon her. Her solitary journey, her struggle against the tundra and the beasts, had rekindled her people's faith. She was not just a blind elder. She was the guardian of wisdom, the embodiment of resilience. True strength, she knew, resided not in the eyes that see, but in the soul that refuses to yield. The village, once again, had been reminded of the power of the human spirit, of the unbreakable connection that bound them in the frozen depths of Yakutia. The darkness of the polar night had been vanquished by the light of hope and altruism. Anya felt the gentle care of the village healer, her experienced hands applying herbs and compresses to her injured shoulder. The pain was still a constant presence, a vivid reminder of the battle fought, but now it was enveloped in a sense of peace and gratitude. She could hear the murmur of the village around her, low, respectful voices, and the intermittent crying of the child, a sound that once of terror was now of pure exhaustion and safety. The girl was alive, warm, back in her parents' arms. That was all that mattered. Boris, his voice choked, approached Anya. He didn't need to see to feel the emotion in his words, the mix of relief and reverence. Anya, you brought hope back to us. You are the strength of our village. Other community members joined, their hands touching her arm, her face in silent gestures of thanks. She felt the connection, the invisible web that bound every heart in that icy place, a web she had reinforced with her courage. That night, under the soft light of the oil lamps and the distant glow of the aurora borealis, the village gathered. There was no celebration, but a reverent quiet, a tacit acknowledgement of the miracle that had occurred. The girl, nestled in her mother's arms, slept deeply, her face serene. Her parents, their eyes red from weeping and gratitude, did not leave Anya's side, their words of thanks echoing with every whisper. You saved our daughter, Anya. You saved us all. Anya, seated in her place of honor, felt the warmth of the fire and the warmth of her people's hearts. She reflected on the journey, on the fear that had propelled her, on the ancestral wisdom that had guided her. It wasn't her eyes, but her acute senses, her connection to the tundra, her soul that refused to yield. She had faced the darkness, not only of the bears and the ice, but of the despair that threatened to swallow them all. And she had won. The story of Anya, the blind elder who defied 7 colossal polar bears and the fury of Yakutia to save a child, would be told for generations. She would become a living legend, a reminder that true strength resides not in sight, but in the courage of the spirit, in unwavering faith in life, and in the love that binds a community. The village, which for a moment had felt the shadow of hopelessness, now stood stronger, more united, with renewed faith in the power of altruism and human resilience. Anya knew that the tundra would continue to impose its challenges, that winter would bring its darkness and relentless cold. But she also knew that, in the frozen depths of Yakutia, the flame of hope would never extinguish as long as there was a heart willing to fight, a soul that refused to yield. She was living proof of that. And feeling the icy breeze that entered through the crack in the door, Anya smiled. The tundra, her old friend and adversary, had witnessed the strength of her people, and life once again had prevailed. The days that followed the night of the rescue were filled with a reverent quiet in the village. Anya, though still feeling the pang of pain in her shoulder and deep exhaustion in every fiber of her being, found solace in the warmth of the furs and the constant presence of her people. The healer continued to tend to her wounds with dedication, and the whispers of gratitude and admiration were a balm to her soul. She could feel the gazes upon her, not of pity, but of a deepened respect, an acknowledgement that she had become more than an elder. She was a beacon of hope. The girl, whose name was Lena, now with her parents, came to visit her every day. Anya felt her small hands tracing her wrinkled face, a soft, hesitant touch that spoke of a connection transcending words. Lena no longer cried. Instead, her tiny fingers traced the lines of Anya's face, as if trying to memorize the geography of her savior. The child's presence was a living reminder of the miracle, of the life that had been rescued from the clutches of darkness and the tundra's relentless cold. The village, once plunged into silent despair, now vibrated with renewed energy. Voices, once laden with worry, sounded lighter, fuller of laughter. Daily tasks, hunting, preparing furs, were all performed with new vigor, an unwavering faith in the future. The story of the blind elder who faced 7 colossal polar bears to save a child was told and retold, not just as a tale of bravery, but as a parable about the strength of the human spirit. Anya, in her quietude, reflected on the nature of courage. It wasn't the absence of fear, she knew, but the decision to move forward despite it. The tundra, her stern teacher, had taught her that life was a cycle of challenges and triumphs. Every blizzard, every successful hunt, every harsh winter, all were lessons. And the greatest lesson of all was that true strength resided not in the sight of the eyes, but in the clarity of the soul, in the connection to the invisible world of the senses and ancestral wisdom. Boris, the hunter's leader, often came to speak with her, seeking advice not just about hunting or the weather, but about life, about how to keep the flame of hope alive in difficult times. He spoke of the change in the village, of how people had grown closer, caring for one another with renewed intensity. The community had become a single body, each member an essential link, and Anya was the heart that beat at its center. Anya knew that life in Yakutia would continue to be a constant battle against the elements. Winter would still bring its darkness and relentless cold, and the dangers of the tundra would always be present. But now, the village had something deeper than mere survival. It had a living legend, proof that faith, altruism, and human connection could move mountains of ice and ward off the most fearsome beasts. The flame of hope, ignited by her courage, would burn brightly in the frozen depths of Yakutia, illuminating the path for future generations.